Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's programming. I hope you're having fun and enjoying learning something new about ataxia. Thank you to Jonas for putting all this together. Really appreciate that. So my name is Dr. Linda Snider. I'm coming to you from Omaha, Nebraska. I have ataxia, and also I'm a member on the board of directors for the National Ataxia Foundation. I also help run the local support group here. And also on my free time, I like to scuba dive and read and do jigsaw puzzles. So I grew up in a little suburb outside of Omaha. And so my ataxia is actually genetic. And I got it through my dad. So I got to see my dad go through all the different stages of ataxia because when I was younger, he didn't have any problems or symptoms. And so, but by the time I was in high school, he was in a wheelchair. When I was younger, he was in the Air Force. He rode a motorcycle. He's from Michigan, and so he loves being outdoors and hunting and fishing and that kind of thing. But as his ataxia progressed, he had some anger with that, and then also lost a lot of friendships and kind of gave up on his hobbies because of it. I think partly he was angry because at his point in time, there was no genetic testing. It was just kind of a wait and see game if you were going to have ataxia. Because it's genetic, it ran in our family. And you definitely knew something was going on because you'd go to a family reunion and everybody was stumbling or had a cane or a walker or a wheelchair. So everyone knew there was something going on, but no one knew exactly what it was. And he was a little bit older than his siblings when he started having problems. And so I think he thought for a time period, like, oh, I escaped it, but it didn't happen that way. So I have an older brother, and he's 3 years older than me. He did not have genetic testing done, but he also does not have symptoms of ataxia, so he probably does not have the gene. So I grew up really active, just a normal kid. I was a competitive roller skater and would travel the country doing that. I was in cheerleading in high school and did other like high school activities. Then I graduated. I went to college at Creighton University and I had a great college experience. You know, I lived in the dorms and went to parties and dated boys and had all the fun college life, and it really just enjoyed myself, even though I knew my dad had ataxia and was watching him decline and progress through all of that. Because I wasn't living at home and seeing it, I didn't really, it's not that I didn't pay attention or notice it. I just didn't think like, oh, this could happen to me or this is going to be in my life. I just was so involved in what I was doing instead. And then in 1994, I graduated and went from college to medical school. I guess I was young and dumb at the time, so there you go. So I decided to give that a whirl. Partly I became a doctor because my dad had ataxia and we went to so many doctors, and that really kind of exposed me to that world. And I thought to myself, you know what, I want to help people and I think I can do this. And so I think because of his ataxia, that kind of helped me decide to go into medicine myself, actually. So at the same time in 1994 is when I started med school. That's kind of about the time that Dr. Harry Orr at the University of Minnesota discovered the first ataxia gene. And so I talked to my cousin Amy on the phone. We're the same age, and this is pre-email, right? So we talked to each other, and she was telling me how she was going to go to Minnesota to get tested and everything. And then I thought, God, you know what? I think I want to do that. I think that sounds like a good idea. because I'm such a planner and I want to plan out like every little piece of my life. So I thought, yeah, I think that would be good. But not realizing I was 3 months into starting a new school. The course load is not exactly easy. It was all new people. I didn't know anybody there. And so I was really just adjusting to all of that when I decided to get my genetic testing done. And so when I came back positive, then I had to deal with like the emotional side of like realizing I was going to have ataxia, that I was looking at my dad and seeing my future and things like that. And I was trying to juggle school and the emotional side of all of that. So that was kind of a trying time for me. I was 21, I think. So I want to talk a little bit about genetic testing and ataxia. I have to say, I'm not a genetic counselor, nor is ataxia my specialty. So this is just me trying to explain it as a non-professional, I guess. So not all ataxias are genetic. Some are. In fact, the majority are. And so a lot of people don't know what kind of ataxia they have. And genetic testing can be expensive. And so some people wonder why it costs so much money. Well, let me try to explain the reasoning behind that. So, when you have ataxia and you want to know specifically maybe what kind you have, particularly if you want to know, like if you're going to pass it on to your children and things like that, um, they to do the genetic testing, they can look for all the different types of ataxia. So that means that it's like looking for a set of keys, but in your whole house. So you're looking upstairs, downstairs, bedroom, office, kitchen, wherever. Those keys could be anywhere. And so then if you work with a genetic counselor and they can narrow down a little bit to have maybe more precise what type of attacks you have based on your family history, what age people are that they start having symptoms, and who exactly is affected and that kind of thing. Now all of a sudden they can order the genetic test, but instead of doing this like really wide approach, they can narrow it down a little bit and say, okay, now we're going to look for those keys, but in these 3 rooms. We're going to look, in the bedroom, in the kitchen, and in the living room, and that's it. And so then the price actually goes down because the people doing it are doing less work. And so, and even if you know what kind of attacks that you have in your family, so somebody else has been tested and they have SCA1 or they have SCA3, so they're looking for a very specific ataxia. Now it actually doesn't cost them much at all, because now you're telling the people, hey, I want you to go to the kitchen and look exactly on the dining room table. The keys are going to be there. And so they can either say yes or no. The keys are right where we expected them to be. And so if you have that situation, it gets even less expensive. And so that was my case. We knew I had SCA1, and so that's what they were looking for when they did it. So when they discovered the ataxia genes, because they're scientists and they're so creative, they called it spinal cerebellar ataxia 1, because it was the first one. They keep discovering new ataxia genes, and I think they're up to 47. So every time they find a new one, they just tack on a new number. So that makes the testing difficult too, because you might have a rare ataxia that they don't even know to look for right now, but are going to look for in 5 years or 10 years when they know they found the gene at that time. So the inheritance patterns, there's 2 ways to inherit an ataxia gene. So there's autosomal dominant and autosomal recessive. So they call them dominant ataxias, and that's like 1, 2, 3, 6, 7. Those are the common ones. And then there's autosomal recessive, which is like the Friedreich's ataxia, ataxia telangiectasia, the AOAs. They fall into that group. And so this is kind of how those processes work. So every person has a genetic makeup. They carry two sets, really. One set from the mom and one set from your dad. So, like, for example, in my scenario, my mother did not have ataxia. My father did have ataxia. So, my mother's makeup is of two non ataxia genes. I'm going to call them normal sometimes. I don't mean to think ataxia is not normal, but it's just sometimes easier to say it that way. So, my dad had a quote normal or non-ataxia gene from his mother and an ataxia gene from his father. Okay, so when they go to have children, there are different combinations that can be made. My dad either gives the child his quote normal gene, and my mom's giving up her normal gene, and that person has no ataxia symptoms because they have two copies of quote normal genes. And that's like my brother's scenario. The other scenario is my dad gives up his ataxia gene, and my mom gives her normal gene. Well, then you have one copy of the ataxia gene and you're symptomatic. You only need one to be symptomatic, and that's my scenario. So there's a 50-50 chance of my dad giving either his ataxia gene or the non-ataxia gene. So that's why they say autosomal dominant is a 50-50 chance to get ataxia. So autosomal recessive is a 25% chance of having ataxia. And it kind of goes like this. So the mom and the dad, they each carry the ataxia gene, but they're not symptomatic. So they have the ataxia gene, but they don't show symptoms of having ataxia. It's in the background, it's hiding. They don't even know about it, to be honest with you. And so what happens is they don't know about it, right? So they start having babies. And so their options are that they have a normal gene from each parent, and that person has two copies of normal genes. They don't have ataxia. They're not a carrier. They have no problems. They can't even have children that have ataxia. It stops with that child. If the mom or the dad gives her ataxia gene, but the other one gives a non-ataxia gene, that person only has one ataxia gene, just like their parents, no symptoms. Carrier, they could potentially pass it on if they have a baby with somebody else who's a carrier, but they themselves have no problems. The other scenario is that the mom gives her ataxia gene, the dad gives his ataxia gene. Now that kid has two ataxia genes, that kid has symptoms, that kid has a problem. And now, if that person were to have a baby, the only option they have is to pass on their ataxia gene because that's all they carry. So they have two copies of that, and that's how they have problems. So that's a 25% chance of inheritance in that scenario. That's a lot of scientific mumbo jumbo. So I hope everyone's not bored and sleeping by now. So, like I said earlier, I was in med school. I was 21 when I found out that I had the gene for ataxia. So I was asymptomatic. I didn't have any problems, but I knew it was going to happen. And I had seen my dad go through it all. So I kind of knew what to expect. And so it was a really hard time for me. And there were definitely times I felt like maybe quitting and things like that. But thankfully, you have to have a really good support system around you to help you move forward and keep fighting. I think it's imperative the people you choose to have on your side. So for me, my best friend that I've known since 7th grade is that blonde on the left with the short hair. She's known me since 7th grade. She's really more like a sister to me. The other blonde girl in the tie-dye shirt is my college roommate. She's still one of my best friends, and in fact put this PowerPoint together for me because I am like computer illiterate. And then the two guys I actually met in med school. So they actually walked me down the aisle at my wedding. They're great guys and they're really fun. And so I think I needed that at that time, is somebody who is just really outgoing and going to have fun with life. So having the knowledge of genetic testing is interesting. So it's not for everyone. It's definitely a personal choice. There's no right or wrong answer of to whether you should or shouldn't have genetic testing. It's really up to you. You really have to decide for yourself what how the knowledge is going to affect you. Talk to your friends and family about it. Definitely talk to a genetic counselor about it before you go through it, because once you have the information in your hand, there's no going back. You know it, there it is. And so for me, I am so glad I knew, because I was able to plan so many things about my life. For example, I bought a ranch house because I knew I wasn't going to do stairs. I picked a job I could do in a wheelchair. A lot of people with ataxia have to apply for disability and quit their jobs because they can't keep doing it in a wheelchair. But I picked a job I could do in a wheelchair specifically for that reason. um, you could tell your spouse so they're not blindsided by this, so they know what their future holds as well. And also it helps with family planning. So I actually chose not to have children, which was a difficult choice to make at the time, but I chose not to have children because I didn't want that 50-50 chance of maybe passing the ataxia on. There are things that they can do now that they couldn't do 20 years ago. And so now what they'll do is they'll take the egg and they'll test for the ataxia gene. And then they'll take the eggs that don't have ataxia and they'll fertilize those. Then they'll implant them into you. So you carry the baby, you have the baby naturally. It's your genetic makeup, it's your egg, it's your partner's sperm, but then you can be guaranteed that that child will not have ataxia. If that had existed when I was younger, I'd probably do that, but it wasn't around then. So that's the benefit of being young and not old, is that you have more options that I did not have at the time. So it's interesting knowing that something's going to happen to you. It's almost like looking into a crystal ball, right? They know that you're going to get ataxia. They're not exactly sure when. They can kind of predict a little bit, but they're not perfect about it. They actually told me that I would be in a wheelchair by the time I was 40. Now I'm 48. Okay. I'm 48 now and I'm not in a wheelchair. And so I thought I would be by now because that's what they told me. So they're not as accurate as they could be, I guess, with it. And things that you do in your life can make a difference. So maybe I would have been in a wheelchair if I had decided to give up and do nothing. But now I'm not, because I really take an active role with the ataxia in my life. Now, when I was younger, I would not, a trip or something. Everybody has that where you naturally trip or a little bit klutzy. But if you know that you're going to have ataxia, now every time you do that, you're like, oh my God, the ataxia is starting, it's happening now. It's not true. You're just being klutzy like everybody else. And at some point, it's happening frequently enough where it is the ataxia. But at some point, you're just a klutz, but you're worried about it. So ataxia just means difficulty with coordination. And so ataxia can be part of a lot of things. So MS or multiple sclerosis, ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, Parkinson's, Huntington's disease, traumatic brain injury or stroke, anything that gives you a hard time walking is called ataxia. Now, we have a diagnosis of ataxia in addition to having the symptoms of ataxia. So, ataxia, some of them can be genetic, some of them can be from other things as well. And they're all a little bit different, which is why it's hard for your doctor to know exactly what's going on, because people start having problems at different ages. What problems they have can be different. So a lot of times, like I started having problems with my walking, particularly at night. When I would get up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, I had trouble walking because the lights weren't on. I needed that visual clue to help me stay balanced. Stairs became a problem. Walking maybe in a park or something outside on uneven ground was a problem. So those were my first symptoms. But other people I've talked to, their voice, losing their voice was their first problem. Other people, they had double vision, they had some vision changes. And so all the different ataxias have different symptoms or combinations of symptoms. They also start at a different age, but in general, almost everyone with ataxia will have trouble walking. You'll have trouble with balance. And what happens is when you start having trouble walking, they call it a wide base gait. So watch people when they walk and they're can walk without problems. Their feet are very close together and they can walk in a straight line. Well, people who start having problems with ataxia, you naturally, to try to stay balanced, start taking your feet, and when you're standing, put them out a little wider instead of close together to make yourself a little more balanced, and you walk that way too. So you can watch people do that. And so sometimes I'll pick up ataxia at the grocery store or something because I'll see someone and I'll be like, they have ataxia because they're walking like that, you know. And then a lot of ataxias have problems with voice. Their voice becomes weak. They also have trouble with swallowing, and then your tongue and your swallowing, that's all muscle control. And so that's why with the ataxia, sometimes people have trouble with choking and breathing and that kinds of things as well. There are definitely things you can do to help your ataxia slow down. I realize there's no cure and there's no medication right now. And scientists are definitely on the verge of a discovery to help with that, and I think that will be a reality in my lifetime. So there will be a medication or something that can be done to help slow the ataxia. But until then, we got to be in control of our own lives and really take advantage of what we have available. So I do yoga. You can do it sitting down, you can do it laying down, and just trying to do some balance poses and stretching your muscles and keeping as limber as possible will help your balance. I wear a weighted vest. Now these I wear mine under my clothes, and what happens is you go to a physical therapist and the physical therapist will assess you and then determine how much weight you need in the vest and where to put the weights exactly to keep you the most stable and the most balanced. And so this cannot be just any old physical therapist. They have to be trained to do it. I wear a Motion Therapeutics vest. I think they're the most reliable company, and they have the most highly trained physical therapists all over the country. And so really, I would highly suggest that somebody look into getting a vest because it's so helpful. And the reason it's helpful is because with ataxia, we lose it's called proprioception. So what that really means is we lose our ability to identify where we are in space, our body, right? You're leaning to the left. Oh, you don't really realize it until you're really far left. Other people realize it when they're barely and can correct. We don't do it till we're much farther along. And so that's why people with ataxia have very exaggerated movements because we have trouble identifying what our body's doing in space. And so the weights that are next to your body help you identify more clearly what your body is doing in space. And so that's helping you make smaller corrections faster. And so that's why the balance vest will help you be a little bit more stable. It's also not just for people that are able to walk still. Even if you're already in a wheelchair, it's helpful because it'll help transfer. So it can help you from the bed to a chair or whatever it is. And then also, if you have any tremors, it helps with that. It helps with writing and it helps with speech. And so the vest can help you no matter what stage you're at. Um, I use a foam pad. It's almost like an egg crate. It's like a PT foam pad. And so what this is you stand on it and it creates an uneven surface under your feet, forcing you to balance. Now, to me, every time you practice something, you're going to be better at it. I mean, it's the concept of like an Olympic athlete. They don't just say, I think I'm a world class athlete. I think I'll go compete in the Olympics. No, no. You might have to have some underlying natural talent, obviously, but they also foster that talent by doing hours and hours and hours of practice. They go to the gym to get stronger. They do all kinds of things to optimize their ability to do athletics. And so to us, to me, I'm an ataxia athlete. And so the more I practice balance, the better I am at balance. The more I practice my speech, the better I am at speech. And so anything you do, the better you're going to be at it. And so I use the foam pad to stand on to help my balance. I stand with 2 feet, try to get them as close together as possible. And then at some point, I try to lift 1 foot, even if it's just for a few seconds at a time. Now, I do this in front of a counter, so I have something to hold on to because I definitely don't want to be unsafe when I'm doing it. The other thing is, anytime there's stress in our bodies, that's going to make the ataxia worse. Most people have experienced lack of sleep will make your ataxia worse. If you're fighting a cold or have a fever because of the flu or something, your ataxia is worse. So anytime your body is fighting stress, the ataxia is affected. And so I really try to do things to help reduce stress in my body. So I go to acupuncture, I get massage regularly. Massage also helps because it keeps your joints as mobile as possible and in as good alignment as possible. And the more motion and the more better alignment you have within your joints and spine, the better your balance is going to be just naturally. I also do cupping. Now, cupping is a technique where it's almost like a vacuum, like a suction cup to your back, or they put it over any muscle really, but your muscle has a very fine layer over it. And so that layer, the concept is with the suction, it takes that very fine layer and kind of lifts it a little bit off the muscle, allowing blood flow to come into the muscle. And so you're increasing blood flow to the muscle. And so that helps any kind of knots you have. It helps build the muscle and that kind of thing. Um, you will have almost it'll look like hickeys from if you get this done. They'll look like bruises. Michael Phelps made this a little bit more popular because he actually does this, and I think he had like a meet, he was on TV or something, and people could see the like the bruising or the hickeys on his back and were like wondering what caused that. And then he was telling everybody that he gets cupping done. So um, the other thing is you have to think about what you put in your body. So food is imperative. It's so important. I could definitely be better about what I eat, but gluten and dairy are the most stressful to our bodies. They increase inflammation within the cells of our bodies. So internally, they create inflammation. So gluten is anything that has flour based. So any kind of pastas, breads, crackers, all the good stuff, baked goods, whatever. If it's got flour in it, it has gluten in it. And that is one of the most inflammatory things internally that we can do to our bodies. So if you can cut that out or cut it down in your diet, your ataxia will oftentimes get better. And in fact, there is a gluten ataxia. There's literally an ataxia related to gluten. And when you cut gluten out of your diet, the ataxia symptoms are gone. I also take some supplements and antioxidants. The antioxidants are also to reduce the cellular stress that's happening inside my body. Um, Definitely talk to your physician or healthcare provider before adding something to your routine, because I definitely don't want it to interact with maybe a medication you're already on or something like that. So you definitely need to discuss this before you decide to just take something. But talk to your healthcare provider, because there is a vitamin E deficiency ataxia. There's a vitamin B12 deficiency ataxia. Now, if your ataxia is from that, that's an easy fix, really. Not like mine. I don't have an option of just taking a vitamin to help my ataxia. So I definitely look into those things. So besides the physical things, I feel like mental health is as important, if not more important. And so really that means finding people who are going to stand by you through the thick and the thin, and who are going to support you through this whole process. It's also nice to make friends with people who have ataxia, because guess what? They know what you're going through without you having to describe it or explain it or anything else. They automatically know that, and you can share information with them about little tricks and things that help their lives that you didn't even think about or know about. And so that sharing of information between ataxians, I think, is so helpful. So meet some other ataxians, get out there, make friends, go out and have a good time. Do not give up who you are as a person because of the ataxia. So a lot of people, I it drives me crazy when people are like, "Oh, before ataxia, I did this, that, and the other thing," and now I have ataxia, so I can't. That's all I say. I can't do it. No, wrong. Okay, let's back up a second. No matter what you do, there's a way to do it. You're going to do it in a new way. Maybe do it differently. You're going to take an old thing and make it new. That's what you have to figure out. That's the job, right? So do some research. There are definitely companies out there that specialize in equipment to help the disabled, to keep you hunting and fishing and doing all those things. You can go rock climbing and do all kinds of interesting things in a wheelchair. I ride a recumbent bike because I want to get outside. Not other people I'm friends with love to get out and ride bikes on these trails. And so I can't ride a regular bike, but they make recumbent tricycles that are very low to the ground. It's super stable. I can't fall out of it. Balance is not a problem. I love to scuba dive. You can scuba dive in a wheelchair. Well, not in the wheelchair, but you can not be able to use your legs and still be able to scuba dive, because people are actually trained to help you in and out of the water. They're help you navigate when you're under the water. So when you're scuba diving, you're actually weightless. There is no gravity. So falling is not an issue. If you can breathe, you can scuba dive. And so I'll be diving even when I'm wheelchair bound, because there are people out there and companies out there designed specifically for wheelchair diving. So I'm going to definitely continue doing that because it's such a beautiful world under the water. Definitely look to resources for help. So the National Ataxia Foundation will have a lot of resources, not just education. So they have webinars so you can learn more about ataxia, but they also have support groups and things like that. So definitely, I think, go out and find your local support group. Um, One good thing that probably happened now this whole COVID thing is that because support groups can't actually meet in person, a lot of them have figured out how to go remotely or do things online, use Zoom or different things like that. And so that allows people actually that live in more remote areas to have access to the support group. So if you have a computer or an iPad or even a phone, you're able to join into one of these support groups, even though you may live out in Timbuktu and not be able to drive there. So that is actually probably one good thing with COVID, is that a lot of support groups have gone to a virtual format, making it more accessible to people. There are also online support groups. There's Hope for Ataxia. There's a Facebook ataxia group, some for parents with children of ataxia, some for spouses or caretakers, some for people who have ataxia themselves. And so that's a great way to get support as well, is through the online support groups. The annual ataxia conference, people come from all over the world with ataxia to this, and scientists come as well. And this is where you really learn about cutting edge research and what's going on in the ataxia community. You can meet other people who have ataxia, share ideas. It's very empowering to have that sense of community and really feel like you belong and have so much camaraderie. So there is no cure or treatment for ataxia at the current time, but scientists are definitely working on that, and they're getting closer and closer. I really believe earlier, like I said, that it's going to happen in my lifetime. The problem is with research is that they need people to study to learn about the disease and how it affects people. And so they need people with ataxia to get neurologic testing done, to give blood samples, to do MRIs and things like that. So they need people with ataxia to volunteer their time and effort to be part of a research program. This will not cost you anything. The research program will cover all your expenses as far as traveling. If you have to fly and stay in a hotel, they'll reimburse you for food and that kind of thing. So there really shouldn't be much of an expense to participating in research. It's more just your time. A lot of researchers want to know exactly what kind of ataxia you have because they're studying a specific kind of ataxia, whether it's SCA1 or SCA47, which is what they're up to now, I think. So a lot of times what the study will do is actually cover the genetic testing, so you can have the genetic testing done. You do not have to know the results. So if you choose to have it done, but you're like, you know what, I'm going to have it done so I can participate, but I don't want to know if I have the gene or not, that's fine. The researchers will know if you have it or not, but you don't have to know if you have it or not. So that's kind of nice to feel like, you can get that covered, find out exactly maybe what's running in the family, and also decide if knowing or not knowing is right for you. So there are a couple places you can look for active clinical trials that are happening. The National Ataxia Foundation is a great place to work with, to know about all the different clinical trials. CORDS is actually a registry for people who have rare diseases. So this registry, what happens is you just sign up, and the scientists will access it, and they'll say, okay, I'm looking for someone who has SCA3, and they could put that in, and then all the different names will come up of the people who have that disease. And so you put your name into the hat, and then scientists can use it to help find you, because you might be able to help with their research. And so I would highly recommend signing up for the CORDS registry. So I think that's the end of my talk. I hope you had fun and learned something at the same time. And thank you for your time. Thanks for listening.